The winter air over eastern Poland was sharp and still on the morning of January 14th, 1945. Snow lay across the frozen fields like a white blanket, broken only by thin tree lines and the dark scars of tank tracks. Somewhere beyond those trees, hidden behind a low ridge, a German Tiger tank waited in silence. Its engine idled softly, its long 88-millimeter gun pointed toward the open ground ahead. Inside the steel hull, the crew believed they held the advantage. For years, the Tiger had ruled the battlefield. Soviet tank crews feared it. Allied tankers whispered about it. Thick armor, deadly accuracy, and the power to destroy an enemy tank from more than a kilometer away.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
But on that cold morning near the town of Sandomierz, something new was approaching across the snow, and within minutes, the legend of the Tiger would face a challenge it had never truly faced before. You can almost feel the freezing wind cutting across the fields as the Soviet armored columns move forward. Engines rumble low and heavy. Steel tracks grind against frozen earth. These are not the lighter T-34s that German tank crews have learned to fight. These machines are larger, slower, and heavier. At the front of the column rolls a new kind of Soviet tank. Its turret is thick and rounded. Its gun barrel is massive. The soldiers inside know they are carrying one of the most powerful weapons the Red Army has ever built. The tank is called the IS-2, named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. And today, its crew is about to test it against one of the most feared tanks of the entire war. To understand this moment, you have to go back several years. When Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in June 1941, the German army pushed deep into Soviet territory with shocking speed. German tanks, especially the Panzer III and Panzer IV, destroyed thousands of Soviet vehicles in the first months of the war. But the Germans soon discovered something unexpected on the battlefield. A new Soviet tank had appeared, the T-34. Its sloped armor and powerful 76-millimeter gun surprised German commanders and forced them to rethink their designs. The answer would come in 1942 with a tank that would become legendary. The Tiger I was Germany's response to the changing battlefield. Designed by the engineers at Henschel and armed with the deadly 88-millimeter KWK-36 gun, the Tiger quickly gained a reputation for dominance. Its frontal armor was up to 100 millimeters thick. Its gun could penetrate most Allied tanks at ranges far beyond what they could return. When Tigers appeared on the battlefield in North Africa, in Russia, and later in Normandy, they often destroyed enemy tanks before those tanks could even get close enough to fight back. The Tiger's reputation grew quickly after its first major appearance near Leningrad in late 1942. German propaganda films showed the heavy tank smashing Soviet defenses. Soldiers wrote letters home describing it as a steel monster. On the Eastern Front, where tank battles often happened across wide open land, the Tiger's long-range firepower made it especially dangerous. Soviet crews sometimes spotted Tigers only seconds before shells struck their armor. Soviet tankers learned quickly that fighting a Tiger head-on was dangerous. A T-34's 76-millimeter gun struggled against the Tiger's armor unless it hit from the side or rear. Even when the Soviets upgraded the T-34 to the T-34-85 with a larger gun in 1944, the Tiger still held an advantage in range and protection. Stories spread among Soviet crews about Tigers knocking out multiple tanks in a single battle. Some tankers believed the Tiger was almost untouchable. German commanders also trusted the Tiger as a battlefield problem solver. When Soviet breakthroughs threatened a sector, heavy tank battalions were often rushed to the area. A handful of Tigers could hold a road or village for hours. Their thick armor allowed them to absorb hits that would destroy lighter tanks. Their accurate optics allowed gunners to strike targets at long distance. On many battlefields from 1943 to 1944, a single Tiger could change the entire situation. But Soviet engineers were not standing still. They were already working on a new heavy tank designed to break German defenses and challenge the strongest enemy armor. The project began in 1943, after Soviet forces encountered German heavy tanks like the Tiger and Panther in larger numbers during battles such as Kursk. The Red Army needed something stronger, something with thicker armor and a gun powerful enough to destroy even the heaviest German machines. The result was the IS-2. The IS-2 looked different from most tanks of the time. Its hull armor was thick and sharply sloped, designed to deflect incoming shells. The turret was heavy and rounded, cast in thick steel. But the most important feature was its gun, the 122mm D-25T cannon. This gun was originally designed for artillery use. When mounted in the IS-2, it gave the tank an enormous punch. A single armor-piercing shell could smash through heavy armor or blow apart bunkers and fortifications. There were trade-offs. The large shells meant the gun fired more slowly than the weapons on most tanks. The crew could usually manage 2 or 3 shots per minute at best, but each shot carried incredible power. Soviet planners believed that if an IS-2 hit a German heavy tank even once, the result could be devastating. Inside the IS-2, the crew worked in a tight and demanding environment. The commander scanned the battlefield through a rotating cupola. The gunner focused on aiming the heavy cannon with precise movements. The loader handled the massive ammunition pieces, lifting shells that weighed more than many rifles combined. Every member of the crew depended on the others. In battle, even a small mistake could cost the tank and the lives inside it. By late 1944, the Red Army was pushing west across Eastern Europe. The Germans were retreating but still fighting hard. Heavy tank battalions equipped with Tigers and Panthers defended key roads and towns. The Soviets responded by deploying their new heavy tanks alongside the familiar T-34 formations. The ground war had become a race toward Germany itself. Soviet commanders wanted to break through the German lines as quickly as possible before the enemy could reorganize. Heavy tanks, like the IS-2, were placed at the front of many armored spearheads. Their job was simple but dangerous: lead the attack, smash enemy strong points, and clear the path for the rest of the army. That brings us back to the frozen fields near Sandomierz. The Soviet offensive, known as the Vistula Oder operation, began on January 12, 1945. Marshal Ivan Konev's First Ukrainian Front launched a massive attack against German positions along the Vistula River in southern Poland. Thousands of artillery guns opened fire in one of the largest bombardments of the war. After hours of shelling, Soviet infantry and tanks surged forward through the smoke. Among them were units of the 71st Guards Heavy Tank Regiment, equipped with IS-2 tanks. Inside one of those tanks sat a young Soviet officer, Senior Lieutenant Ivan Klimov. His crew had spent weeks preparing for this moment. They knew German heavy tanks might appear during the advance. They had studied reports about Tigers and Panthers. They had practiced loading the massive 122mm shells again and again inside the cramped turret. As their tank moved forward across the snow-covered field, visibility was poor. Smoke from artillery and burning vehicles drifted through the air. The engine roared as the IS-2 climbed a slight ridge. The crew scanned the horizon through narrow viewing ports. Then the gunner saw something. A dark shape near a tree line, low, wide, and unmistakable. A tiger. The German tank belonged to Schwer Panzerabteilung 424, one of the heavy tank battalions sent to slow the Soviet advance. Its commander, Oberleutnant Hans Weber, had chosen a good defensive position behind the ridge. From there, his gun could cover the open field stretching toward the Soviet approach route. Inside the Tiger, Weber's gunner adjusted the sights of the long 88mm cannon. The range was long, but not impossible, around 1,000 yards. The Tiger had destroyed enemy tanks at greater distances before. For a moment, both crews were staring at each other across the frozen field. In earlier years of the war, this situation would have ended quickly. A Tiger firing first usually meant destruction for the enemy tank. Soviet crews knew that. Many had seen it happen. But this time was different. Inside the IS-2, Klimov gave a calm order to his gunner. Load armor-piercing. The loader struggled with the heavy two-part ammunition. The shell and propellant were separate pieces, each weighing more than 20 kilograms. In the cramped turret, every movement required strength and practice. Snow outside reflected bright light through the viewing slit. The gunner steadied the sight. Range, about 1,000 yards. Not close, but within reach. Across the field, the Tiger fired first. The 88mm cannon roared, sending a shell screaming across the snow. It struck the front of the IS-2 with a violent clang. The impact shook the entire tank. Sparks and fragments flew across the armor, but the shell did not penetrate. The sloped frontal armor of the IS-2 had done its job. Inside the Soviet tank, the crew felt the hit, but remained alive. Klimov shouted the order. Fire! The 122mm gun thundered. The massive shell traveled across the field toward the German tank. Unlike smaller high-velocity shells, the Soviet round carried huge kinetic energy and explosive force. It struck the Tiger's turret front. The result shocked even experienced soldiers watching nearby. The impact smashed through the armor, sending fragments of steel and spall tearing through the turret interior. The explosion inside the turret was catastrophic. Equipment shattered. The crew inside had almost no chance. Within seconds, smoke began pouring from the Tiger. Soviet infantry advancing behind the tanks saw the burning German machine and cheered. The sight sent a clear message across the battlefield. The Red Army now had a tank capable of defeating Germany's heavy armor. Word spread quickly among Soviet armored units. Reports began circulating that the new IS-2 could destroy Tigers at combat distance. Crews who had once approached German heavy tanks with caution now felt a new sense of confidence. They still respected the danger of the Tiger's gun, but they no longer believed it was invincible. German tank crews were also learning a new reality. Intelligence reports began warning that Soviet heavy tanks, armed with 122mm guns, had appeared in increasing numbers. Panther and Tiger commanders were advised to avoid direct engagements whenever possible. Flanking shots were recommended, and coordinated attacks with multiple tanks became more important. But the speed of the Soviet advance often removed those options. Columns of Soviet armor pushed forward day and night. Supply trucks followed behind them across damaged roads and frozen ground. Bridges were rebuilt quickly by engineering units. The Red Army had become a massive machine moving steadily west. For German defenders, every village and road junction became another desperate stand. During these battles, the IS-2 proved especially valuable in destroying fortified positions. The large, high-explosive shells fired by its gun could collapse buildings used as defensive strongpoints. Anti-tank guns hidden behind walls were often crushed by a single shot. Soviet infantry learned to advance closely behind the heavy tanks, using them as moving shields. Yet the IS-2 still faced dangers. German Panzerfaust teams hiding in ruins could knock out even the heaviest tank at close range. Panthers still had guns capable of penetrating the IS-2 if they found the right angle. Tank warfare remained deadly for both sides, but moments like the duel near Sandomierz showed that the balance had shifted. The Tiger was still powerful. Its gun was still deadly, but it no longer held absolute dominance. Production numbers told the larger story of the war. Germany built about 1,347 Tiger I tanks during the entire conflict. Each one required huge amounts of steel, skilled labor, and time. The Soviet Union, fighting a total war, focused on producing tanks in large numbers. Alongside tens of thousands of T-34s, the Soviet Union produced more than 3,800 IS-2 heavy tanks between 1943 and 1945. Quantity and power together created overwhelming force. By the spring of 1945, Soviet armored columns were approaching the Oder River, the last major barrier before Berlin. IS-2 tanks rolled through shattered towns and across temporary bridges under constant fire. Their thick armor and massive guns made them ideal for the brutal urban fighting that was coming. When the Battle of Berlin began in April 1945, many IS-2 tanks led assaults through the city streets. Their 122mm shells blasted through walls and barricades. German defenders hiding in strong points found themselves facing a weapon designed to tear buildings apart. Some IS-2 crews fought almost continuously during those final weeks of the war. Back on that snowy field in January 1945, however, none of the soldiers knew how quickly the war would soon collapse for Germany. What they saw instead was a single burning Tiger, smoke rising into the cold air. The myth of the unstoppable Tiger had been broken many times before by brave crews and lucky shots, but encounters like this one made it clear that the balance of armored power had shifted. The Red Army now had a machine that could meet Germany's strongest tank and win. And as Soviet columns continued rolling west across Poland, one thing became certain. The age of the Tiger was ending. The heavy rumble of Soviet engines moved steadily toward Germany's heart, and the new king of the battlefield carried a massive 122mm gun pointed straight ahead.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.